Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of PLP Talks, where we have interesting conversations with people we know in the bike industry. In today's episode, we're going to talk with Gabe Tiller, the executive director behind the Oregon Timber Trail. He's also a well-known bikepacking photographer who's developed a bunch of really popular routes like the Oregon Outback. In this interview, we're going to talk about what he thinks makes an iconic route. We're going to learn about some of the brass tacks behind something like the Oregon Timber Trail, like what it takes to work with a collection of people to create an iconic route, and how that's different from just being a single route creator. And before we start, I wanted to give a big thanks to the people that signed up to be monthly subscribers in the month of February and March. It's these small donations that really keep this channel going and this YouTube interview series going. So if you want to join this list of amazing people, be sure to check out the show notes or the description below of the video if you're watching it on YouTube. And this episode is also supported by Whitefish Bike Retreat. Learn more about them at whitefishbikeretreat.com. It's truly a magical place that caters to bikepackers, bike tourists, mountain bikers, and gravel cyclists. You can either camp outside on their property or stay in one of their private rooms or bunk rooms. The Whitefish Bike Retreat also has a full-on bike repair area, as well as a small shop that lets you rent and buy bike packing gear so you can try before you buy. And there's also an amazing network of single track on property that connects to the larger Whitefish single track network. So if you're passing through on your Great Divide journey, or if you're just looking for a bikey place to base camp, definitely check out the Whitefish Bike Retreat. So put in your earbuds, hop on the trainer if you're at home, or pretend like you're working at your desk. It's okay, we won't tell, and enjoy the episode. Thanks again, Gabe, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about it.
So I feel like one of the things that you're really well known for is just these amazing routes that you create. Can you talk maybe a little bit big picture about what you feel like makes a great route?
So I think what really makes it fun is if a route is thematic somehow. If it crosses a whole state, or it crosses a whole country, or it's focused on hot springs, or a certain set of like the best mountain biking trails in an area, or just your own theme, whether it's just a place that you saw on the map that you want to go visit. So I think that's my biggest takeaway, is that's what's really inspiring to people, is if you can give it this theme throughout the whole route.
So when you come up with a final route, how many iterations does it usually take? I mean, I know it varies by length of the route, but just kind of a rough picture of what's behind what it takes to create a route.
That's a good question. And it depends on if it's something that I'm just going to go do, or if it's something I'm going to publish. So if it's something I'm just going to go do, I probably go back and look at it and edit it and analyze different map sources, maybe a half a dozen times or something. If I'm going to publish it afterwards, then there's a whole, even a more thorough analyzation of the route in really fine detail. So for something like the Timber Trail, that's an iterative process. It's still evolving. It's going to change each year. And that, I would say, probably went through 100 different changes or more until we launched in July. And now we have a lot more data since launch, and a lot more feedback and suggestions from our riders. And that'll all get folded into the next round of revisions. And that's going to be probably a good 40 hours of work right there, updating the route guide and route materials. So it's a lot of work behind the scenes that's really rewarding, but I think it's taken for granted, and a lot of people don't realize the amount of work they need to put into a route if they're developing a route on their own.
Let's jump into the Timber Trail. For those that aren't familiar with the project, can you kind of just paint the broad picture?
Sure. Yeah, the Oregon Timber Trail is a 670-mile route across Oregon's backcountry. It's really focused on backcountry single track. A lot of bikepacking routes are dirt roads or Jeep roads, and this has plenty of those too, but we really wanted to focus on including as many single track sections and really keep that experience a backcountry experience. So it starts down on the California border in southern Oregon, right outside the community of Lakeview, and traverses the Warner Mountains and Winter Rim north, and then connects to the Cascade Range, drops into Oak Ridge, winds around the Cascades past Bend and Sisters, then comes up around Mount Hood and finishes in Hood River, Oregon.
So is that the preferred direction going north?
Yeah, we had to sort of choose one at some point, just how we worded it and develop the materials. And you can certainly ride it in either direction, though some sections we developed with the direction in mind. For instance, Oak Ridge, we climb up Bunchgrass Ridge if you're going from south to north, which is we actually take a road access to climb up Bunchgrass Ridge instead of going the trail for most of the elevation gain. But that means you get to descend down the Middle Fork Trail, and that's sort of like if you're going the other direction, then you'd descend down all Bunchgrass and maybe take the road for some of the Middle Fork Trail on your climb up going south. So it's just sort of, you just have to, if you're going the opposite direction, you just have to maybe make a few modifications on your own.
What's the percentage breakdown of single track to road sections?
It's about half and half right now. It's a little, I think we clocked it at about 51% single track at this point.
And most of these single track trails already existed and you're linking them up, or has there been new trail development?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's the whole Timber Trail project has been really analyzing existing trails and roads and figuring out what we need to do to connect them and maintain them or rehabilitate them. In some cases, a lot of these trails have been just covered by blowdown or damaged by fire. And it's much easier to rehabilitate a trail than it is to build a new trail. So that's sort of the approach we've taken, is using existing resources and really figuring out how to lend this momentum that we have and really sort of get it up and running to provide the experience that we want to provide.
So a lot of the trails that need like rehabilitation, were they mountain bike specific, or were they just multi-use trails that are being packaged into the Timber Trail?
There's very, very few mountain bike specific trails on the Timber Trail. Most trails are multi-use trails. So, including the one that comes to mind, the Fremont National Rec Trail in the Fremont tier is a 130-mile long National Recreation Trail designated in 1980. But it's the really low population area down there. And I think it's starting to see some people exploring that far into the southern part of the state. But for many years, it just hasn't had the use or like the dedicated trail groups really maintaining it. So that's not to say that they haven't been. There's been some really good work done by Oregon equestrian groups down there, but it's 130 miles long, so there's only so much you can do if you're a small organization. So that's a multi-use trail that I've seen on a map for many years and have heard that it's impossible, don't try. And it wasn't until we had a project like this with some weight behind it that we could actually conceive of turning it into something that we could ride or hike or ride a horse on.
When you picture a rider doing this, who's the ideal rider? Is it something where you need lots of technical ability to traverse, or like, I guess, what kind of skill level would you need to do it successfully?
Right now, yeah, I would say you're going to need a pretty significant technical skill level and just physical fitness level, and it's going to be a lot of long days and a lot of probably demoralizing days. So, and that's just because of the rugged state. I think we don't want to dumb down the trail too much and make it super easy, but we want to find that happy medium where it's something that you need a good intermediate skill level. We don't want it to be super aggressive. So we've sort of tried to figure out, and that was part of how we decided which trails to use. Some of the trails we decided were too technical to include in the route, and that'll sort of get evened out over time. Each tier and each segment has a rating, both a technical rating, a physical rating, and sort of a bikepacking rating, which is a scale developed by Bikepacking Routes, and that's sort of just how difficult is it to get water, carry water, find food, the logistics component. So the ratings are probably going to change each time we update the route a little bit, but hopefully that'll even out over time.
Is the opportunity for resupply fairly available, or are there really long stretches where you have to carry multiple days of food and water?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have I think the longest section without food is around 100 miles. Longest section without water is, I believe, around 50. So it just depends on how fast you're able to go. I would say at any given point, you can always bail off the route and get to some sort of services in case of emergency, in shorter distance than that. But like actually along the route within like a 10-mile corridor, those are the longest distances.
Let's talk a little bit about the tier system. Why break it up into tiers, and what does it do for the rider experience?
Yeah, I think it has ended up being one of the smarter decisions we made from the get-go. It's just easier to digest that way. Um, if I'm developing a route, I sort of start and know it really well and don't mind if it's one big chunk. So like I wouldn't necessarily have done that just for myself. But if I'm like looking at someone else's route, it's just so much information to really take in and digest and figure out how it stacks up against how one tier is different than the other. Like, so breaking it into tiers, then you can just look at a tier and be like, this one maybe is the one for me. And each one has a really natural sort of character to it. Each one sort of is loosely associated with a national forest, and each of the national forests has a really unique landscape, really unique forests, really unique geology. So
it's not just like a artificial division. There's something like inherent to that region that would make up the tier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you envision people doing it in sections because there's a tier, it's presented as a tier, or doing it in one fell swoop?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of like the PCT, it's inspiring because it does exist in one big route, but what's actually manageable for most people is taking off a week or something and doing a smaller section. So we're really expecting people like take 4 years and do one tier at a time or something like that. And in our rider survey of this past season, we found that about 75% of the people that were using the timber trail were actually car camping and doing day rides on sections of the timber trail, and only, I think it was about 8 or 10% rode the whole timber trail. So, we knew it was going to be weighted like that a little bit, but we weren't prepared for it to be weighted that much, that few people actually riding the whole trail, the through bike experience.
Right. Do you have a sense of how many people have done the complete trail yet?
It's really hard to say. I wish there was a better way to gauge those numbers. It's not a lot. I think we had a really short season. We published the route files in mid-July, and by mid-August we had pretty expansive wildfires across Oregon that ended up closing a lot of the trail. So, yeah, I think this year hopefully will be fewer wildfires and a little better year for everything. I think in 2017 we probably had about a dozen people ride the whole route from start to finish.
Do you have a personal favorite section of the route?
I really like the Fremont tier. A lot of the route, I've been riding in a lot of the areas of the rest of the route for a number of years, and they're all amazing in their own right. But the Fremont route definitely feels like the uncharted territory, and that's really exciting to me, to go down there and ride trails. And it's honestly some of the most stunning landscape we have in the state. Just this basin range and these huge cliffs and lakes and vistas it's pretty incredible. I feel like it's really unparalleled in Oregon and even in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm excited to have more people come and really appreciate that. I think it's sort of a really diamond in the rough down there.
Right. If someone were to just like base camp and ride that section, where would be a good place to stay? Is there camping, or is there a town nearby?
Yeah, that's part of our work this spring, is actually developing some of these weekend trip ideas, or just coming up with a good resource for that type of trip. So in the Fremont tier, there's a lot of really good camping. I really like the little town of Paisley. It's got everything you need. It's got a coffee shop, a saloon, and a little store, and a gas station that's open like on 6 days a week. So it's like, uh, it's a good place. It's got a little hotel there, and there's camping right up the river there in town. So
that's a Chuacan, right? River.
Yeah, and I always pronounce it wrong. So I think it's actually pronounced Shiwakan or
Chuacan.
Shiwakan.
Yeah, okay. Chewy can.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get everyone to just start using the shortened Chewy.
The Chewy.
If we can get Chewy to catch on,
Nice.
that'd be great.
Yeah, there's some good fishing there. Laura and I actually did some camping there, I think last year, and yeah, you can. It's a fun little river to fish. And I think there used to be a fly shop in town. I don't know if they're still open, but yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that. I'd like to go back and fish or even float it in high water. It looks like a really cool river.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's really unique about the Timber Trail as opposed to many other bikepacking routes, it sounds like you're working with a group of people. Can you tell us a little bit about who's involved and what the structure is like?
It's definitely been a really unique and special opportunity. It's not just me looking at maps and publishing a GPS file. It's been much more thorough than that. It's been collaborative. Initially, it was Travel Oregon, our tourism agency here in the state of Oregon. They're not just a marketing agency. They also work to create assets, tourism assets, and especially recreation assets in the state. So they were looking to create, or at least figure out the feasibility of some sort of hut-to-hut system like exists in British Columbia or the Alps or New Zealand. And out of that study, this timber trail idea was born, and that's when sort of I was looped in, and we started linking trails together and started linking a lot of stakeholders together and having meetings and figuring out what the concerns and the opportunities and different alignment options were. And then last March, that had been in process for about 2 years, I think. Last March, we formed the Oregon Timber Trail Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization just dedicated to shepherding the route forward in a sustainable and progressive sort of fashion. So that organization now is growing and has been extremely productive. It's been really exciting for me to be involved with an organization that sort of just come up out of nowhere and is just getting things done. So that's like very exciting for me. We just published like our recap of 2017 on our website. So that does a really good job of sort of summarizing what has happened since we formed last March. I mentioned the stewardship work we've been doing. We're also trying to really improve the experience, which can manifest in a bunch of different ways, and that's just focusing on the rider experience that we've identified, this backcountry single track experience. But the other two tenets of our mission are a community tenant, which is really engaging in the local communities that the route travels through and figuring out how we can create economic development around the Oregon Timber Trail and really infuse some tourism dollars in these communities, as well as an education component, which could be any number of things, whether it's teaching trail stewards about safely operating a chainsaw, or whether it's just holding a slideshow on the history of the timber trail, or we have a class coming up on how to make backcountry meals, like do your own like backcountry cooking and that sort of thing. So the education component is just like, we saw early on that there was there was a need to really educate users that might not be familiar with how to ride their bike in the backcountry, how to camp in the backcountry, and do all that in a really sustainable fashion. So those are the four tenants the organization's founded around. We've done some really great work so far, and we just published this morning a calendar of events for 2018. So I'm really excited for that work too.
Imagine this be like herding cats in terms of like the different land managers and types of land. Is it all public, and like how do you broach those conversations with the land managers?
It's just an ongoing conversation, and that was the first people we contacted, because we're amazingly lucky here in Oregon to have so much public land. The route is about 90% on National Forest Service trails and soft surface roads, and then 5-10% is on probably ODOT roads on the shoulders of some paved roads here and there. But for the vast majority of the ride, you're going to be on public land. So that's really cool. They were the first stakeholders we really started talking to. They directed the conversation and who else we should bring in at the early stages. And we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Region 6, which is like the Pacific Northwest Forest Service, in July. And we're working now with each of the 4 individual national forests to really, we're working really closely to really hold these stewardship events in a safe and professional manner, and probably ultimately develop even closer, more formal relationships with each one of the national forests that we travel through.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking to them, what were kind of their initial concerns, or were they fully supported from the get-go?
I mean, it's a cool concept. Everyone likes the concept. It's a big picture concept. The concerns were really varied depending on the area. Like the Fremont National Forest is concerned that not enough people are going to be using the trail or maintaining the trail. The Deschutes National Forest is worried that too many people are going to be using and maintaining the trail. So it's really specific, and it's even more granular than each forest. It's each specific trail or trailhead or road crossing. It really was a step by step, a mile by mile sort of like look at these 670 miles of this alignment and think about increased use, think about erosion, think about impact to the ecology, think about just impact in the communities and impact with other trail users. That's why it's taken 2 years of these discussions to really suss all that out and keep track of it all and really prioritize what concerns were the highest concern and how to come up with solutions for them. Mm-hmm. And that's where the 4 tenets of our organization's mission came from, was those conversations. So I think hopefully it was successful, or at least will continue to be successful.
Right. So how many people are involved in the actual route planning?
That's been primarily me, and then Harry Dalgard from Travel Oregon has been really involved in helping convene these meetings with other stakeholders and talk about that. And obviously then lots of other input from the Forest Service, other trail organizations, and then now that we've had riders out on the route, we've had a lot of input from them on what sections needed maintenance work or what sections. We had a couple instances where it just didn't go through. It was a routing error, because I haven't ridden the whole 670 miles consecutively yet. So a lot of different sources. Actually, this is I'm drinking coffee out of this mug that I just got this morning from a super rad lady down in the Willamette tier, and she heard about the project very early on and would like go out and scout different sections that I hadn't been, and was like really invaluable in like creating the route and sort of finding a lot about this old Cascades Crest area that I hadn't heard hardly anything about. And then Trans-Cascadia ended up using some of those trails this past year. So it was one of those really cool stories where it was like didn't exist, and all of a sudden this lady went and did some scouting, and we're including in the route, and now there's like a race happening down there and all this trail maintenance, and people are using these trails, not just bikers but equestrians and hikers too, that haven't really been open for many years. So
nice. Was that wasn't Jolene, was it? Or...
Yeah, it was Jolene. Yeah.
Nice. It seems like a lot of bikepacking routes are developed by usually an individual. Like what are the strengths of doing it by committee, and what are like some of the challenges, I guess?
Like when I came on to the project, it was sort of a list of trails that might connect. And then I stitched them together, and sure, it's changed over the past couple of years quite a bit, but that initial alignment was primarily my work, I think, and bringing other people on collaboratively has really made it stronger, because now you have the ownership of a lot of people. And if it was just one person, I think the tendency is to just publish the route, and there's no real motivation to ever update it or improve it or maintain it. And I think with an organization, we're constantly going to be looking at it and trying to improve it, and just really, it's really just got a lot lot more legs than just an individual publishing a route. At least in the routes that I've published, they're great. I've spent a lot of time developing them, but once they're published, they sort of just like walk away, And this has got a much better component of that stewardship route. So yeah, we've got a couple cool little new trail connectors in the works where we're just looking at areas where a route will wind around and go around a lake on a dirt road or something, and we're like, oh, if we just built a mile of new trail right here, we could cut this big lobe off that doesn't really go anywhere, and this would be a more direct route and more single track. So we're just trying to assess those where those experience improvements can really be improved. And because we're an organization, because we have these relationships with the national forests, we're really able to actually talk about doing this in reality and hopefully sort of fine tweak the whole route over the coming years. And I think it ends up being a much stronger product in the end, for sure.
Do you think this will be a trend eventually in bikepacking route creation, like this kind of collaborative partnership that's where routes are a little bit more institutionalized, I guess?
I mean, if you look at any other outside of the bike world, there's always somebody who's sort of the spearheading the thing. If you look at the Pacific Northwest Trail, you have one guy who he had been just championing this Pacific Northwest Trail that was just as rugged and impossible to use as the Timber Trail was a couple of years ago. But after he spent, I think, 20, 30 years really fighting for it now, it's a national, is it a national scenic trail, national rec trail? I think it's a national scenic trail. You have through hikers hiking it. It's, that's a really cool thing. Same thing with the Arizona Trail, Colorado Trail, Pacific Crest Trail. They all started out, I'm sure, as someone's passion project, but developed into an organization, and it really has that sustainability component to it.
Mm-hmm. Did you model the Timber Trail, like the collaborative effort, to like hiking trails to kind of get a sense of structure?
Not necessarily. I mean, we definitely use that parallel a lot as a way to explain the type of experience we're trying to create for backcountry cyclists. We haven't necessarily tried to create a parallel with how an organization is structured. I mean, you look at organizations like the PCTA, and it's hard not to be jealous of how well they've developed as an organization. I mean, they have a whole trail skills college of how to build and maintain trails, and this is a free-for-all resource. You can go on there and download all this documentation on how the really nerdy specifics on how to build and maintain trails, and just the amount of resource that went into developing those is pretty impressive. All of their fundraising and volunteer and all of their engagement with their community is super incredible. So it's really hard to not look at that and be like, okay, someday maybe, but it's almost unobtainable. It seems like at this point, but we're only 6 months in. So
yeah. Has this experience kind of, I don't know, changed how you view route creation in general, or does it kind of just confirm things that you've known?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about how to move forward. I think it's big picture. So it's pretty hard to think about, at least thinking back on how I would have done that or how I could have done that alone. It seems pretty impossible. And looking forward, it's pretty obvious. A lot of people have sort of had this light bulb go off being like, oh, there's this trail in Oregon and there's this trail in Baja California. What about this gap that's called California in between them? Why can't we connect that line? And then what about Washington? It's sort of the natural next big picture question. And I don't know anything about mountain biking in California. So it's I want to push that forward, but it's really going to depend on being able to talk to people who know the trails there, and not just their local trails, but talk to people who understand the connectivity of trail systems and how it all works together instead of just your local backdoor trails.
As someone that's looking for a new route to ride, do you have any routes that you want to ride yourself personally?
Yeah, I think some of the ones that Bikepacking Routes has just published this past year are super interesting. I want to do I think it's the Plateau Passage one. I hope I'm not mixing them up. I was just looking at like three of them so they're probably all jumbled in my brain. But that one is sort of a neat connector from Las Vegas all the way over to somewhere in Colorado. So that'll be super neat. That's sort of on my list. But honestly, the fun thing for me is still the getting out there and exploring stuff. So I'll probably start doing a lot, or probably continue doing a lot of the scouting and the riding in Oregon, but then going to California and trying to figure out how some of those connections and trail systems exist down there, or another direction up in Washington.
Like, since you've been bikepacking, how have you seen it changed?
It's gotten way more popular, which I think is great. I think bikepacking has the potential to be just more inclusive than a lot of different types of cycling. Most cycling genres come out of, oh, here's this way we can, put some limiters on the type of experience and create a competitive event out of it. And that's been like the ultimate like achievement of most different types of biking for whatever reason, is this just human nature to be competitive. I think bikepacking isn't really that way, although some people are doing it competitively, and that's great. But I think bikepacking is a little broader, and because of that, has the ability to draw on a lot more people that don't really care about cyclocross, don't really want to do a road race, and because of that, I think the different types of people and the demographics of people that are interested in bikepacking are quite a bit broader and larger than most genres of cycling.
It seems like bike brands were making bikes primarily for sport, right? And now like the shift has been a little bit more exploratory, which is kind of a cool change to see in the last couple of years. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's not just bikepacking; it's the gravel trend, the adventure bike trend, and even mountain bikes. You've gotten away from your downhill racing or your cross country racing into trail bikes and enduro bikes and that sort of thing. So it's a really cool trend. I mean, that's just I don't have anything against competition. I just like to see it diversify a little bit. If it's just focused on competition, you have this it's just a weird sport. It's not like hiking, it's like,
there's no competitive hiking. Yeah. Yeah, it was fascinating. In our interview with Benedict, he said that someone from Specialized had told him that they kind of predict that this exploratory cycling is going to overtake the road bike sales in like 5 years, and that'll be interesting to see if that actually comes to. It
would be great to see that happen. I just think it's more accessible to a lot more people, and honestly, I don't know if it's just that me and my friends are getting older or something, but I'm hearing a lot more people just fed up with trying to go ride their bike with traffic. And now through navigation and cycling technology, riding on roads and trails that we would otherwise, in a few years ago, not really consider feasible. Now they're possible. And I think a lot of people are like, that's clicking for them. And they're like, oh, I don't actually have to ride with traffic anymore. If I use these navigation resources, if I use this newer bike technology, I can actually go ride these really remote, really rugged trails and areas.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer. Like, given the choice between riding a paved road with traffic or unpaved surface where there's no traffic, like why would you choose the former?
Yeah, the whole gravel biking trend sort of cracks me up. It's like no one likes riding their bike through deep gravel. We just like it because there's no cars there. Right.
I mean, you brought up an interesting point. Do you feel like there's a tight correlation between the technology and the types of riding that's popular now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like there's the huge a huge gain in popularity with through hiking and lightweight backpacking. That transcends into cycling as well. Gear has just gotten infinitely lighter and better, warmer, more waterproof. It's just gotten so much easier to do this in a comfortable manner. used to be if you were doing anything like this, you just had to be good at suffering, and that was your tool for having fun. Now there's still definitely that component in there, I'm sure, but it's completely feasible to pack very little. You don't have to suffer carrying a lot of gear or suffer being cold and hungry. You can actually be pretty comfortable with very little, and thru hikers have realized that. Bike packers are realizing that. I think that this trend in both of those worlds is really driven by technology and fabric technology. I think it's cool to see.
Now, you can ride the timber trail on a wide variety of bikes, but what do you think are like some of the technical requirements that you think would make up, the perfect bike for the timber trail?
29-inch hardtail is a great choice. A plus size, like a 2.8, 3-inch tire is probably going to be better, but definitely not necessary. Just a regular mountain bike tire is fine. I think it was about half and half of the riders that rode it this year were on full suspension versus hardtails. I think there was a couple people who did it fully rigid, which is also totally possible. Just it's going to beat you up a lot more without that front suspension. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely not go any narrower than like a 2.2-inch tire or something. I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, can I do this on these fat road bikes with sort of fat road tires?" And you can do it on whatever you want, but I just wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, you could do it, but so let's wrap up with one last question. What is your dream bike, or do you already have your dream bike?
I've been trying to figure that out. I've been having my dual bike be my mountain bike and bikepacking bike, and it's been great. Carver Harvester. It's a titanium 29 plus bike. I got it right at the beginning of the whole plus bike trend. I had a Surly Krampus right when they came out and loved it so much that I upgraded to that as soon as that got available. And it's been great, but I think I'm going to shift into a bikepacking specific bike and then a full suspension mountain bike a little bit that I'll still do some bikepacking with. So I don't know what that is going to be, but I did just order a Monet Bikes. He's a small builder. He started out working for Black Sheep Bikes in Colorado, now builds his own. And that's going to be another really, really rad 29 plus bike, and should be done next month. So excited to build that up.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. And if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you have any other questions for Gabe, leave those in the comments below. I'll try to get them to answer them. And thanks for being on the show, Gabe.
Yeah. Thanks for chatting, Russ.
Yeah. Thanks again for listening to the podcast version of PLP Talks. And if you enjoyed it, consider being a monthly supporter. It really goes a long way. And if you can't do that, we totally understand. If you still want to help the show, be sure to give it a rating and review in the podcast app on your iPhone, if that's how you discovered it, or whatever podcast playing app you use, Stitcher, Google Play, etc. It really spreads love and keeps this show going. So until next time, ride bikes, travel, and do good.